Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. I never expected my peaceful move into a decent house to turn into a battle against an entitled neighbor, but life has its surprises. Allow me to share the dramatic and exciting turn of events that unfolded, leading to a satisfying resolution. Before diving into this wild tale, let me give you some background. I had worked my way up in the culinary world, from culinary school to becoming a head chef. Eventually, my hard work paid off, and I could afford a house of my own. It wasn't a luxurious mansion, but it held the promise of becoming a beautiful home with a little remodeling. As summer arrived, I embarked on transforming the house, starting with the yard. Little did I know that this endeavor would introduce me to the notorious Karen, my entitled neighbor. She had lived in the neighborhood for ages, and seemed to feel a sense of ownership over my new home. One fateful day, as I busied myself with fixing up the garden beds, Karen approached me, uninvited, and without any semblance of manners. She immediately interrogated me about being the new owner, seemingly determined to undermine my rightful claim. Karen: So, are you the one that bought this house? Me: Yes, I am the new owner. Karen: Did you know Miss Dorothy? Me: Not personally, but I met her briefly during the paperwork process. Karen: This is one of the most beautiful houses on the block. My son grew up on this street, and Miss Dorothy always let him play in the yard. Me: That's kind of her. I'm sure your son can find another suitable house around here. Karen: Are you even going to live here long term? I bet you're just flipping it. That is a shame. My son would have really taken care of this house. Her audacity and entitlement angered me, and I decided to assert myself. Me: Actually, I'm renovating this house for my girlfriend and me to live in. Thanks for the assumptions. Now, if you don't mind, I have work to do. Karen huffed, retreating to her own abode. Days passed without any further encounters with Karen, and I focused on the renovations, making steady progress. The front yard was nearly complete, with only the wooden fence left to repaint. Then out of the blue, Karen and her son stormed into my life, hurling unfounded accusations and displaying blatant racism. Karen's son: What? That is the guy who bought the house? An immigrant? I chose to ignore their ignorant comments, refusing to engage with their toxicity. However, fate had a twist in store for this entitled duo. While diligently working on my home, I noticed Karen's son engaging in a drug deal right in broad daylight. Shocked, I confided in my friendly next-door neighbor, who revealed that suspicions of his illicit activities had circulated in the neighborhood. The mother, Karen, had been protecting her son, shielding him from the consequences of his actions. Determined to expose their wrongdoing, I installed security cameras, capturing incriminating footage of Karen's son involved in the drug deals. I wasted no time promptly delivering the evidence to the police. Justice would prevail, and the son and mother were both arrested. Their entitlement and deceitfulness had finally caught up with them. Reflecting on this bizarre series of events, I couldn't help but wonder why those who engage in the dirtiest deeds are often the first to point fingers at immigrants like myself. The entitled often hold themselves to double standards, blinded by prejudice and ignorance. As for me, I continued to transform my house into a true home, now free from the shadows cast by Karen and her son's entitlement. The neighborhood rallied around me, showing support and appreciation for my resilience in the face of adversity. I learned that unity and integrity can triumph over entitlement and prejudice, leaving a lasting impact on the community. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My best friend Karen is a first-grade teacher, and as soon as she told me this story, it gave me such a sense of justice that I knew I had to retell it here. TLDR at the end. 2 years ago, Karen had a student named Xavier. He was a sweet little 6-year-old boy when things were good, but his parents had just gotten divorced. His mom wasn't that great even before she was out of the picture, and his dad was quite disengaged from both his son's behavior and his IEP, Individualized Education Plan. Rather understandably, Xavier acted out in class. He would refuse to listen to Karen, push other kids, and disrupt class in more ways than I could possibly list. Now Karen worked her ass off with Xavier to improve his behavior and get his dad more involved in a positive way. She would often call me and talk about it to decompress because that's what friends were for. But occasionally Xavier went too far and did something she couldn't just deal with in class, like trying to stab another student in the hand with a pencil. On those occasions, she wrote him up with a referral and sent him to the vice principal, VP. But surprise, surprise, the VP was absolutely no help whatsoever. He would joke around with Xavier, refuse to address the problem Karen sent Xavier there for, give him candy, and then lecture Karen for writing up a 6-year-old for any reason because it reflected badly on the VP. I'm pretty sure this has to do with the bullcrap known as merit pay, but whatever. Unfortunately, his actions made it significantly harder for Karen to help Xavier. To top it all off, Karen figured out after a few referrals that the VP logged into the system and erased each of Xavier's referrals, thus erasing all evidence of Xavier's pattern of behavior. In a word, this is bad. I know nothing about education, but I damn well know that much. My brother was a holy terror in elementary school and got in so much trouble from 3rd to 6th grades that both the principal and vice principal were on a first-name basis with my mom. Those records sure didn't disappear, not into the shredder and certainly not into the digital ether. She reported this to her higher-ups who weren't the VP, but they both told him about the complaint, and specified that Karen was the one making the complaint. The VP was cold and rude to her after that. Nothing was done about it because it seemed to be a one-time thing. But now Karen knew what to do. Every time she had to write Xavier up again, which blessedly happened less often as the year went on, she meticulously documented everything herself. She sent herself all the relevant stuff, saved the emails, the whole shebang. By the end of the year, Xavier's behavior had greatly improved thanks to her mentoring and the various ways she learned to engage with him in the classroom. She even talked to his 2nd grade teacher to make sure the woman knew how to work with Xavier. God, Karen went above and beyond for this child. Partway through the next school year, the higher-ups came to talk to Karen again. Even though nothing was done about her complaint the previous year, a record had been made of it. As it turns out, another teacher had reported the VP for doing the exact same thing to her as he had done to Karen. If she had anything related to her own ordeal, they wanted to see it. Oh boy, did she. She gave them every single digital receipt she had accumulated for the better part of a school year to compare with the VP's, establishing a pattern of him undermining teachers by erasing students' patterns of behavior. The VP was quickly removed from his position as vice principal of Karen's school, even though he wasn't technically fired. He was just moved to a different school, and put in a much lesser position, and paid significantly less than before. Bonus: he taught history at Karen's and my high school while we attended it, and everyone loved him. I look forward to telling this whole story at our reunion because we sure don't like him now. The next one is a petty revenge story. So, here's my story. I, 53F, am a disabled vet and use a variety of mobility aids to get around. I also get almost all my healthcare and meds from the local VA hospital. This past Monday I realized that I was out of some meds and hadn't received the refills yet, so I rushed to the VA hospital pharmacy to get enough to tide me over. Since my local VA hospital is absolutely huge, I always use my mobility scooter because there's absolutely no way I can physically navigate the parking lot, as well as the labyrinth that the inside consists of. After I completed my transactions and checked in with a couple of my health providers, I scooted myself out the doors with the intention of loading up my scooter in my vehicle and getting the heck out of Dodge. Now, with it being a Monday, everyone and their dog is trying to find parking to get into the building, so there are cars driving around looking for open spots to park. As I'm heading past vehicles, one pulls slightly in front of me to block my ability to continue moving forward, and this woman, let's call her Karen, rolls down her window and yells at me for trying to cut in line. She claims she was there first and all that. The guy in the car next to me is just staring at her with this absolute what the duck expression, about to get out of his vehicle to help me confront Karen. I shake my head and back my scooter up to go a different way to get to my vehicle. She passes me as I reach my truck and realizes that I'm loading up the scooter so I can leave. Well, she decides she's going to take my spot. Not today, Karen. I nod at the guy who wanted to help me, hop in my truck, and back out of the parking space in a way that blocks Karen and gives easy access to the other guy. I made sure to use all 5 fingers when I smiled and waved at her as I drove away. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I used to manage the activations department for an ISP. I wouldn't say I managed the team as my style as they worked with me, not for me. I was simply the department's leader. For some context, the company had been growing for quite some time, but unfortunately not hiring enough staff to cover the growth. I started in the support department before being moved to this position after the entire old activations team quit. Due to the small world it is in the ISP space in my country, I'll keep things a little vague. Some background is required. The old team of 3, Plus, the manager used to have one person work on the oldest tickets in their queue, plus two on the newest tickets to keep things moving, being interrupted by calls, walk-ups, and messages. The manager would handle billing and cancellations. The same ticket would often get handled by multiple agents in a day, often the same agent multiple times too. Almost every day they were all doing unpaid overtime, we're all salaried employees, to handle the overflow from support throughout the night. When they quit, they had about 1,000 order tickets. Complaints were common, but not outrageous. I knew that was unsustainable given the growth in acquisitions. By the time this story is relevant, we had over 3,000 tickets and almost no complaints with the same number of less experienced staff. To put that number in a little more perspective, that was 2 to 3 times as many tickets as every other department combined. We made many changes over time, and I became an expert in the back end of the ticketing system. But the biggest change was we changed our workflow to a priority system, and everything now had a due date. All new tickets had a due date of the day they came in. If the customer wanted their connection on a different date, and the pre-check showed no tech was required, that became the new due date. If a tech was needed, the appointment became the due date. If the customer emailed us against their ticket, or any update happened to the ticket, the due date changed automatically from whatever it was to today, so we could be across the developments, as customer request dates and tech dates could be months into the future. Suddenly the age of the ticket didn't matter, just the due date, and this reduced so much double handling, and customer updates were responded to quickly, and calls dropped significantly. Now stick with me, as all of this becomes relevant. My priorities were to handle the cancellations and billing. When done, I followed the same priority as the team, unless I was in meetings. The team's priorities were oversimplified. 1. Get new orders and relocations vetted, techs booked, and set applicable due dates. 2. Activate the completed orders or update the customer, tech, and due date if there were issues. 3. Important escalate overdue orders and follow-up escalations, due date. 4. Activate voice orders. 5. Finally, everything else that was due today. It became a well-oiled machine. The escalations were maybe 0.5% to 1% of our orders. As we had so few complaints and typically raving positive reviews from our customers, the general manager didn't really understand how we worked or the depth of the changes that made us so efficient. My daily report was usually skipped in the end-of-day meetings as we had minimal issues. He focused on the other departments. The way we worked now meant that tech issues or appointment issues were also escalated and resolved quickly as nothing slipped through the cracks anymore. The internet wholesaler worked really well with us as we set clear expectations with our customers, and we always had great data to back up the escalation process. Our most remote customers, who had to wait long times for techs, completely understood. Usually a tech was taking a chartered bush flight out there, followed by some off-road driving to get to the customer to get a satellite internet connection installed. These customers were often hundreds of kilometers from the nearest town, and understood the logistics that would be involved and the waiting periods. Very rarely was this an issue. On to the story. Now, while we had so many orders coming in, we had just as many, usually more some days, customers canceling their services, largely due to the long support wait times or poor quality support response emails. This meant the general manager was panicking about our records showing we were losing customers to the board and shareholders. In front of everyone, he had a massive yelling fit directed at me about the company's negative growth, and this was my fault, and I needed to have every customer connected within 3 days, or else we escalate it. We have too many orders not connected. No more excuses from the wholesaler. Did I mention they were great and moved heaven and earth for us? Escalating these and getting them connected was our number one priority. Follow them up daily. He'd had enough of my team slacking off, etc. Everyone's jaws around me dropped. They knew we weren't perfect, but we were the smoothest running department in the company. I saw red and took a breath. That's fine. Cue malicious compliance. After that public dressing down, I immediately sent him an email confirming what he just said. I got it back in writing. Techs take longer than 3 days. Those orders and escalations become our number one priority. He didn't say business days. So I sat with my team and informed them that our ticket queue is going to be in a world of hurt. But we need to make it clear to him that he doesn't understand how we work, what we do, and that the way he spoke about us was inappropriate. They are not to stress about the numbers. They are not to do unpaid overtime. I don't care that they are on a salary. Salary accounts for reasonable overtime, and this is not reasonable. They are to end work when their shift ends. Do not accept time off in lieu, only accept paid overtime. I will take the fallout. They aren't paid to be stressed. Most days we have to work on about 300 tickets total. And today was a Friday. Customer not getting connected until Tuesday. Well, that's 4 days. Escalate. Customer's roads impassable due to a flood, so tech has to wait for dry weather. Too bad. Escalate. We escalated about 50 new orders that day, which meant Monday we had the usual weekend and Monday orders plus those 50. That day over 100 new orders were escalated, plus the 50 followed up. So our queue reflected we had about 450 tickets due. Less than a third of the new connections got connected, even though a tech wasn't needed. The next day, the same thing, except only a handful of orders got connected. Now we had 600 tickets, overdue. By Thursday, support's being hammered by people asking about their connections. Overdue tickets hit the thousands. Wait times blew out, orders got canceled, complaints got raised. Come the next Monday, the support managers were screaming at me to get my department in order. I directed them to the general manager. A meeting was called with all department managers over the current state the business found themselves in. When I was asked what was going on, I simply pointed to the email, referenced the dressing down my team got, and informed him I was simply following orders. That's ridiculous. Use your brain. The next one is an entitled people story. This will not surprise some people who commented on my previous post because my parents did some of the exact things they said they would, which was wanting either my money or my signature. I did expect the classic lines of narcissists saying that I owed them or give me some kind of socialist BS of sharing the wealth. But that was just my imagination running wild. The ensuing situation was somewhat similar to that, but much more tame, I guess you could say. They seemed to know not to push me too far now, and were mostly aiming for pity. It began when my parents recently got in touch with me through social media and asked for a meeting in a public place of my choosing. It just screamed trap, but I wasn't afraid. In fact, I was amused. They know I'm not to be messed with anymore, so I could only wonder what they wanted this time. I picked a local restaurant that may have a name of an olive and a garden in it, and we met up there. Dan was with them, but he kept his mouth shut most of the time. We had awkward greetings, ordered some drinks, and then cut to the chase. My parents begged me to help Dan get his own apartment so he could finally move out. Apparently, Dan's credit isn't so great. Gee, I wonder why. Could it be his wife regularly spends him into a hole? Well, they asked that I help by either supplying some capital or by co-signing for the apartment and helping to pay the rent for it. I simply said no to both. That's when Dan spoke up in anger and yelled at me that I have so much and I don't have a family to support like he does. He needed my help, and I should be sparing the money for his family since I don't have one myself. I laughed and asked where they were when I needed their help. Oh, that's right. They were pointing and laughing at me for being homeless. Or should we go further back to my childhood? I'd love to delve into that with plenty of ears to listen in around us. My mother grabbed my hand and begged me not to speak of any of it. My father and Dan both just looked away and said nothing. Pretty sure they wanted to say something like they used to at me, but held their tongues. I asked them if they thought I was rich or something, and their look said it all. And when I told them I don't have that kind of money, they looked at me like deer in headlights. I broke it down about how much I'd managed to save for the down payment on my house, and the way I had to live and work in order to save that much so fast. And then how I spent nearly all of it on the down payment of my house. I'm still in financial recovery. I did have monthly income to spare, yes, but most of it was going right into my savings. I asked Dan what his yearly salary was, and when he told me, I pointed out that it was actually a bit higher than mine. I then loosely broke things down in rough math in front of my parents on how about 70% of my income goes to my mortgage, insurance, gasoline, internet, phone, food, and other bills, and then there's maybe 30% of that left at most that I can put into savings, and I need that money saved to get back on my feet in time, and I have to make sure I have savings to fall back on. My truck is from the 90s. If it were to break down, I'd need money to either fix or replace it. And there are other things one would need a rainy day fund for, like home repairs, doctors, taxes, lawyers, or anything in general you'd need quick cash for when it's a sudden unexpected expense. So, as you can see, I just can't spare money for Dan. And I also refuse to co-sign for anything as that would leave me on the hook for any bill Dan couldn't or wouldn't pay. Then I pointed out that's likely why my parents didn't co-sign for Dan's apartment themselves long ago. And my mother just started crying again. I was pretty much one step ahead of them in all of this. I'm not an ATM, and I'm not a fool. And I stated that right to their faces. I expected my father to become angry with me like he always does. But this time he just, well, didn't. I've known this man to explode on me for the slightest provocation of not enabling my brother all of my life, but this time he just didn't do that. There wasn't even a sneer on his face. The only way I could describe the look he had was regret and defeat. Maybe regret for being a crappy parent, or maybe regret because he can't bully me around anymore. Who knows? Either way, my parents couldn't really argue with me, and I wasn't about to give them any money. Dan just got up and said this was all just a waste of their time, and that he was leaving. My mother started apologizing for him, but Dan still wanted to leave. Then, just to kill with kindness, I offered to buy them a round of unlimited soup and salad while we were all there. I guess they couldn't turn down free food since we hadn't ordered anything but drinks yet, and they stayed. I went out of my way to talk about anything other than money. Dan remained quiet and was either eating his food or looking at his phone. But my parents just awkwardly talked with me. They brought up that they've recently joined a local Christian church, and that they'd already been going for the last 2 weeks. I said good for them, and they, of course, started trying to advertise that they'd like me to go too. I simply said no thanks, and they were smart enough not to push further. When the meal was finished, Dan left $10 on the table for the tip, and walked off without saying another word to me or anyone. My mother just excused his behavior and we all parted ways. That was about it. Not nearly as much drama as I thought there'd be. But this is still far better than how things used to be with my parents and brother. As for sister-in-law, well, she's been regularly complaining online about my parents. She really doesn't seem to like the fact that she's not the queen bee of their house. And I think her toxicity is finally getting to them. Why else would they be so desperate to come crawling back to me? Sister-in-law actually wants my parents to move into a camper like I had to do in order to make space in the house, and she's being told no every time. She does seem to have a following of Karen-minded people like her, though, because here and there I get messaged by someone I don't know who are intent on raging at me for not giving up my house for sister-in-law. I don't bother to argue with these people anymore, I just block and move on. Though there was one persistent troll who had my phone number and they call from a different number every time. Yes, it seems to be the same person who called me to say I need to make way for a real family man like Dan. But I couldn't care less. The calls, though, seemed to have slowed down, if not maybe stopped, because I made it clear to that person that they were only amusing me by keeping this up so long. The last time they called was around the beginning of the month, and it's been silence from them since then. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.